So my sentence was 15 to life, and what that means is you have to do 15 years minimum before you then see the parole board. And the life part of it means that there was never going to come a point in time where they were legally obligated to release me. It was just going to be up to their discretion, and I would just yes.
A maximum security.
I was sent to a maximum security prison
at 17 years old.
At 17 years old, yeah, very dangerous, very frightening. You know, I'm there with fully formed adults, many of whom are guilty of very serious violent crimes, and I'm 17 years old, and you know, I'm from the suburbs. I don't think I've been in very many fights to that point, and I'm there with grown men, and then I have this, you know, bullseye on my back because I'm convicted of a rape along with a murder, and there's a vigilante mentality towards people who are convicted of sex offenses. So very frightening and dangerous situation.
How far away was this prison from?
Yeah, so it's Elmira Correctional Facility, and it was 4.5 hours away from Peekskill.
Okay. And during that whole process of being incarcerated, like going through the processing and all that, like what was that experience like for you? And actually getting there and staying there for the first time?
Yeah. Well, it was very frightening. I remember being, you know, having on handcuffs and a chain around my waist and having my legs fastened together and fastened to the legs of the prisoner on the bus next to me. I remember how large the prison wall loomed and how menacing the barbed wire appeared. Yet the wheels of the bus kept turning, bringing me closer and closer to and eventually into, you know, the prison. As I walked down the cell gallery, there were a lot of prisoners there whose arms were as big as my legs. So, you know, it was really frightening, just as was the fact that I was entering a facility where, you know, the guards were in charge rather than the civilians. And that in and of itself was kind of like a frightening prospect, frightening reality as well. But I would describe prison as, you know, a nonstop obstacle course featuring the guards, other civilians, and other prisoners as obstacles to the main objective, which is to overturn the conviction and regain my freedom. You know, I had to keep fighting off feelings of hopelessness, thoughts of giving up, suicidal ideation. It was very hard to adjust to being in the cell. So Elmira gave us recreation at night, but like every other night. So the nights we didn't have recreation, I would be in the cell from like about 5:20 forward. I mean, you know, just go out for dinner and then be in the cell from 5:20 afterwards. So it took a couple of years for me to just get used to being in the cell. I mean, I just tried to sleep the time away. I mean, in time, I came up with other things to do while I was in the cell. I came up with other coping patterns. But people have asked me a lot, like, you know, how did I deal with being in prison? What kept me going? So it was belief in God was one thing, and another thing was that in my mind, I was kind of living from appeal to appeal. Like, I didn't focus that I had a 15 to life sentence. I was just trying to make it to the next year or two, and where I was, you know, for the next appeal to be decided, which I was sure that I was gonna win because I knew I was innocent and I still believed in the system. Used to go to the law library, and learning the law kind of gave a sense of comfort and empowerment. I would collect articles about other people who were exonerated, and I used that as motivation to keep going. In 1997, Elmira Correctional Facility let us purchase televisions. So I purchased a TV, and I had the television in the cell. I mean, for the most part, it stayed off because I was doing legal work and writing letters looking for help. But I did watch certain programs like each week. And so that was part of the coping process. But the other thing was that, you know, I kind of engaged in a delusion there. Like when I would watch certain programs like each week, like I would pretend like I was visiting with friends because I was having very few visitors. My mother was the only person who consistently came to see me. But you know, she would cancel visits a lot, and there would be as the years went on, I saw her less and less. The last 5-6 years, I was lucky if I saw her once every 6 months.
What was the total amount of time you were in there?
16 years.
So you were in there for a full 16 years.
I was, yeah.
Did prison change you as a human?
Well, Yeah, I did. Yeah, in the sense, I mean, it's common for there to be psychological after effects of being incarcerated.
What
So
aspects of it changed you?
I don't like to hope, because if you hope, then you can be let down and then you can be hurt. So there's that. I don't like processes where whether I'm going to be allowed to do something or not that I want to do is somehow going to be in the hands of somebody else. Because I'm used to just being disappointed. I mean, think about, when I was in the hands of my defense attorney, and then, I guess we'll get into it after, but in the course of being incarcerated, I mean, I lost 7 appeals. I mean, so,
Wow.
I definitely would like to get into that a little bit after. But, being let down in the appeals, and then, writing letters for 4 years once my appeals were over, trying to find someone to take my case for free so I could find some new evidence. Those are all disappointments. Going to the parole board and, walking around the prison the next 3 days thinking I had somehow defied the odds and that I'd be going home, only to learn that I would not, which is how I wound up doing 16 years off of a 15 to life sentence. All those, even down to a minor level, if I had to ask a guard for one thing or another that I was, supposed to have or entitled to, and, just having that as a short shrift type of thing. So all the sum total of that is what I'm getting at when I'm saying I don't like putting decision in people's hands. I'm used to disappointment. So I think it changed me in that aspect of things. And, I like to, I don't like to have a lot of things going on at the same time, and I like things to be orderly and linear and logical. And if they don't, then they feel kind of like an out of control feeling, and and that kind of again ties back to what happened to me. Like when I lost in federal court, I lost because my attorney was given the wrong information by the court clerk, which resulted in my paperwork arriving 4 days too late, which the court thought was more important. At the time, the district attorney at the time, Janine Pirro, her office asked the court, just rule that he's late and just dismiss his case without looking at the rest of the issues, and that's what the court did. And then I challenged that decision 3 times. I challenged in front of federal court, the Court of Appeals, on the issue of whether that was the correct ruling to time bar me, and where future U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor, she upheld, her and her colleague Rosemary Pooler, they upheld that ruling. And then I asked to re-argue it in front of them, and they denied the re-argument, and then the U.S. Supreme Court denied me. So my point in mentioning that is, I know how like one minor thing can snowball and speedball into something really big that has a catastrophic result at the end. So I still kind of have that in my mind a little bit. So I feel like it affected me that way. Certainly, in terms of my social life, it kind of knocked the train off of the rails. I mean, as I described before, I had a rather large social circle as a kid prior to everything happening to me, and when I got arrested, I lost touch with everybody except for like one of my friends, and he stayed in touch with me for about 5 years before we lost contact. But my point is that I don't feel like I've really recovered socially in terms of being able to build like a new social network of associates and activity partners and friends. That's what I'm trying to say. That's another way that it kind of impacted me. But look, I don't think all of it was well. Certainly, I mean, it had a lot. I went through a lot of stages of development as a.
I mean, you were a kid.
I was a kid.
You were growing up.
Yes, and I did that in prison. Yes, you're right. And I guess my point that I'm trying to make now is that as a 32-year-old, I had to do things, rites of passage and things that normally would have been done much earlier. So I didn't have a driver's license. I had never lived alone before. I never went shopping. I had never wrote a check. I had never had to balance a budget. So those were things that I had to do much later in life. So I think that was a particular challenge at reintegrating.
The thing that I've noticed about people that I've talked to that spend a lot of time in prison is, most all of them that I've talked to, they went in much later in life, and what they describe is this how they have to reflect on their lives once they get in there. Like when you're in a cell and you're alone especially even like a lot of these people that I've talked to, they spent time in the SHU, and the one thing that they describe is the amount of self-reflection that has to go into that, like reflecting on all the decisions they've made throughout their lives and what they've done, and writing and working through the thoughts and the decisions that they've made throughout their lives, because most of them were guilty and they have committed crimes, and they've worked their way mentally through that. So I'm wondering, for someone as young as yourself, A, you're innocent, you actually didn't commit the crime, but B, you're so young, you hadn't been through that much already. Like you hadn't had many life experiences. So it must have been so much different for somebody like you.
Yeah, it definitely was different because, like, look, I met a lot of prisoners, like you said, and they said to me, look, I did what I did. I got caught. I was wrong. I'm not going to cry about it. Just make the best of it and try to go home as quickly as I can. But for me, I could never get to that place because, as you correctly point out, I was innocent. So, I could never get there. So the experience of doing time while innocent, I think, is much different than the experience of doing time while you were guilty. And then again, just as you're mentioning, just doing that, while being young, I think made it especially difficult. Like I remember that one of the correction officers said to me when I arrived at Elmira, they said to me, "Well, do you want to go to protective custody?" And I'm like, "Well, what's that?" Well, that's if you feel that your life's in danger. The only way we could really protect you is if you go to protective custody, and what that would involve is that you would be in the cell 23 hours a day out of 24. You would go to the recreation area by yourself. You'd use the phone by yourself, and you wouldn't be able to go to school or go to any programs. But on the other hand, you would be safe. And I couldn't deal with being in the cell as it was, much less agreeing to be in there 23 hours a day for the next however long I was going to be, the next 15 years. So as a 17-year-old, I remember thinking that, and here was my line of reasoning. Imagine going through this line of reasoning and coming out with this conclusion at that age. I remember thinking to myself, well, I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe I've been found guilty of a crime I didn't commit. I can't believe I'm in prison. I'm not going to make things worse by going to protective custody. So, I'm going to go to the general population and take my chances. And if somebody kills me, well, then I guess I don't need to worry about doing the rest of this life sentence.
Right.
Well,
That's brutal.
That is. I think also in terms of coping with being in prison, a few things. So I didn't really have the luxury of losing my mind because I knew that nobody was coming to my rescue. So I knew at least no one that I knew, and so I was going to have to try to find somebody that I didn't know before and hope that person could become a champion for me and try to build a bridge between me and the necessary legal help that I needed, as I had read it happen in other cases. And so to do that, I knew that I was going to have to hold it together to maximize my chances of doing that. So that was another aspect of it. And another aspect, the psychologically, the utilization of euphemisms. So I'm not going to my, prison assignment in the morning or the afternoon. I'm going to school or I'm going to work. It's not the prison warden. It's the superintendent. It's not the guards. It's the correction officers. So those things. Then from 1998 to 2006, I read 3 or 4 books, nonfiction books a week. So I kept my mind going. Kept my mind going while I was in. And lastly, when I played sports, and I wrote about this in an op-ed that Sports Illustrated published. When I would play basketball, ping pong, and chess, I engaged in this elaborate delusion, like if I was a professional player, and so were the other people, But it wasn't like kids fooling around, like on a playground. This was a defense mechanism. Like I needed to get out of the prison for a couple of hours, so I engaged in this delusion that way. And so all of those things were factors. I mean, when I would listen to sports talk radio, for example, it was not listening to sports talk radio. This was like a lifeline to the outside. And in that context, I'm just considering, that I had very little contact with the outside. I mean, my brother, who's 3.5 years younger than me, he came to see me 3 times in 16 years. Not at all in the last decade. My mother was my only consistent visitor, but like I said, last 5-6 years, I would see her once every like 6 months. A couple of sets of aunts and uncles that would come, but then they would disappear for 3 years, and then it would keep going. So I had very little contact to the outside. So for most intents and purposes, though not literal, I did the time by myself. And I said that to say this last point, that I also I placed the ad in the paper looking for a pen pal. I put the ad in the small paper called the Sacramento Bee, and I picked that paper because one of the other inmates had suggested that to me. So I had placed ads in some local papers looking for just hungry and desperate for contact with the outside, and again hoping that from pen pal, maybe the champion, to ultimately legal help. I had all that in my head at the same time. But I got in trouble a couple of times for placing those ads in local papers, so some of the guards saw it, and I got in trouble for that. So I thought, well, this paper out in Sacramento, it's not likely that anybody here is gonna see. So somebody wrote me. A guy named Scott wrote me, and so I felt like this pen pal showed up at just in the nick of time. And like I was asking the stranger that I didn't know from anywhere, I was asking him, look, do you think I should quit? You think I should, quit this? And you think I should just, go ahead and kill myself? I'm never going to get out of here any other kind of way. So he was another factor in surviving that. And lastly, there was another prisoner there named Frank Sterling who was also innocent. And we used to get together once every 6 weeks in the yard, and half the conversation would be about morale and continuing to go forward. And the other part would be like a brainstorm session about what was the next tactic to do for us to try to overturn the conviction and regain our freedom. And I believed in Frank's innocence because it was a similar false confession case, and an alternative suspect confessed to 4 different people, and ultimately he was exonerated 2 years by DNA, a couple of years after I am.
Wow.
So I said that to say, like, I wasn't just some naive kid in prison believing that someone else was innocent. I mean, he actually was.
That's insane. Did you have to join any gangs in prison to keep yourself safe? Because I know a lot of people have to do that.
Yeah.
The people that don't join gangs typically have to go through a lot of adversity.
Right. Well, I think that's more of a southern thing than it is than it is more up north. But
really?
Like maybe more like in
like I know
Alabama, maybe in Mississippi, or maybe like in Texas. Not so much like that. I didn't find it to be like that in New York.
Okay, so there wasn't any segregation as far as like neo-Nazis, and then like the black people and the Mexicans, they would all have their own kind of like.
Well, there were gangs in a prison. I mean, I wouldn't say it was racially segregated. It was not, but so it's not like what you're saying, but at the same time, there were definitely gangs. I mean, there was like the Bloods, which were made up of almost the blacks, and then there was the Crips also, and then there was Spanish gangs also. There was the Latin Kings, there was the Dominicans, there was La Familia, and yeah, you did have like some of the whites that were there, the supremacists that were there. That was like.
So did they approach you and try to get you to join them, or?
No, that didn't happen to me. While I was in prison, I didn't experience that. But look, throughout the years, there were definitely times when I got beat up for sure, and in my mid-20s, I mean, here and there, I'd come up with a win here and there. But for the most part, look, I'm this white dude from the suburbs that had 3 or 4 fights in my life. I mean, what do you think I'm gonna? Who do you think? You think I'm gonna defeat people that are running from the street, that are fully formed adults, many of them are, that wasn't gonna happen.
Did you focus on transforming yourself into like more of like a tough guy? Or?
No, I didn't do that. I didn't go that route. But there were some old timers that kind of put me under their wing, and so I picked up on different survival tactics. So like I would mind my business, I would never, I wouldn't open the doors like borrowing or asking anybody for anything. I never got involved in a conversation about what was going to be watched on the television, or when I was in my cell, like I wouldn't like talk outside of the gate, right. So I mean, so those things and. There's certain things you can do to try to minimize things. I wouldn't say that everything is like totally in your hands. It never is. But if you do certain things, if you avoid certain things, then you can minimize.
You mentioned something in a weight room where
yes,
dumbbells were dropped on you or something.
Right. So All right, so in 1997, I was in Shawangunk Correctional Facility, which is like considered to be like a maxi max type thing, like one of the more secure prisons. Recall that it had been, that this vigilante mentality towards people convicted of sex offenses. So Shawangunk, there wasn't a lot. It was a maxi max, so it was dangerous in terms of the collection of prisoners. But at the same time, there was very little violence or anything that was happening there, and it was a facility that was relatively close to the city as compared to many of the other facilities that were further up north. And so by there being very little that was happening, it actually made it more dangerous because the normal respect that would go on in other prisons didn't really go on there. So everyone was a smaller prison. Everyone was kind of like on top of each other, like into each other's business. There wasn't a lot that was going on. So some of the prisoners went to the law library and they looked up my case because they wanted to know what I was in prison for.
Right.
And they saw in the court opinions, they always give like a factual background of the case. And so they saw I was there for a sex offense, and they made copies of the case, and they, passing it out to people and stapling it up on the bulletin board. So everybody got like hostile. For the most part, most people were hostile. And the ones that were not, they really didn't want to get involved into the thing. Look, man, I don't agree with what people are saying, but look, I'm trying to go home, man. I don't got time to get involved in this other problems regarding you. So, they people didn't want to be around me. So it was getting more and more hostile there, and it got to the point that, there were 4 people out of everyone that really distinguished themselves, and it got to the point, like, I was letting things go. I was breaking prison survival rules. I was letting things go that I really shouldn't have been letting go. Like people
Right.
were saying, shooting indirects and direct statements at me, and I was letting things go because
Being passive.
yeah, I
When
was
you
being
should-
passive,
when
what I
people-
should not have been.
Right.
Right. And part of that was because they were all much bigger than me, but then also, this was the one time that I had a paid attorney. People came in the picture that my mother didn't know previously, and everybody put in a manageable amount of money. So I had a private attorney, and my point is that I thought that was going to make a difference in the court. So I'm thinking I can't fight these people with my hands. I'm going to have to use a weapon or something. But then it would be just my luck that I would, that I would be found, that I would beat the case that I'm wrongfully imprisoned for, but I will not be able to go home because I caught another case while in prison. So that all was part of letting things go, being more passive. And finally it got to the point that, it seemed clear to me that these guys were going to come and try to stab me. That just seemed like that was imminent. And so, rather than waiting for that, I took the fight to them. So I snuck a 10-pound weight out from the small yard. I put it in this net bag that you're supposed to use for laundry. And I swung it at this guy. But the issue is that, like, I didn't want to, like, kill anybody. I didn't want to cause some kind of permanent injury, so I didn't swing the thing all that hard. I took a lot off of it, more than what I should. So I hit him. He went flying, but it didn't really do that much. You understand? And then from there, they formed like a circle around us, and we're fighting. And he's like the fan favorite.
Like multiple people? You weren't alone?
What? No, I'm saying this happened in the day room area where there's like a television and chairs to sit down at.
Oh, so
This
you just
happened
ran up on him
he walked by me and I swung the damn thing, but I didn't swing it. I took too much off of it because I had a concern for him, but
didn't wanna
also
kill
for
him.
me. I didn't want
Right.
to kill him. I didn't want to catch a case. So it hits him. It doesn't do all that much. So people like form like a circle around us, and he's like the fan favorite, and we're fighting with our hands, but like he's overpowering me, right? And so this weight plate, they start cheering for him, like use the weight plate, right? So this weight plate is at the foot. So there were a couple of other people that had told me that that I had been hanging out with, and they said, look, you got to stop letting all this stuff go. We can't step up for you. You got to do the first thing, and we'll come right in behind you. And so this weight, as I'm getting my rear end kicked. Well, where the hell's the help at, right? You said you were gonna, but the weight plate is at the foot of this guy, so he runs over to try to get it. I didn't try to stop him because I figured, well, they're not going to let him pick the weight plate up, right? Except they did. And so he starts swinging that thing at me, and I'm blocking a lot of it, but I'm not perfect, and so I got hit multiple times on the side of my head with a weight plate. I still have scars. I don't know if you can see. I still have scars from here and here on my hands.
Jesus.
You know, so
what? How big was it? Do you know how much weight it was?
It was a 10. It was a
10 pound. Okay.
It was a 10 pound. It was a 10 pound weight plate.
Fuck.
We get sent to the outside hospital and everything, and the outside hospital says that I'm supposed to be put in the prison hospital when I go back, not in the SHU, just for observation. But instead, they put me in the SHU, anyway. So this was one of my lowest points.
Yeah, no matter what happens, if you're involved in a fight, whether you win or you get your ass kicked, you're going to the SHU.
Yeah, right. Yeah, depending on where it happens at. Yes. Yeah, definitely. And what I was saying, this was my lowest point in this. Imagine this. So I'm in the SHU. I'm here because I preemptively defended myself against people that were going to come to stab me because as far as they're concerned, I'm a rapist. And while I'm there, I get the decision from the federal court saying that I've lost because the court clerk gave my lawyer the wrong information on the filing procedure. So my petition arrived 4 days late.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's dark. That's a dark day.
Yeah, it really, really was. And I want to just take a second here, and this is kind of the reasons why I kind of like this podcast a lot, because we're not trying to get everything into a 20-minute, half-hour, even hour-long segment. We have to go longer than that. I want to just take a second here to describe my experience in the SHU.
Yes.
Okay, so the light is on all the time, okay, and there's no clock. You can't see the clock, so and you can't see the outside. So I never have I never have any idea of what time of the day it was. With the one clue is if there's breakfast items on the tray, on the food tray, then I would know it's breakfast time. It's around 7:30. But other than that, no clock. The light's on all the time. There's a lot of noise. There's very little property you have in your cell. All your cosmetics and hygienic items, those are all put in a locker with your name on it, locked up. And when you go to take a shower, then you can have access to it. You can have the clothes that you have on, one change of clothes, and that's it. There's no privacy at all. It's just a big gate. But at the same time, you can't see anybody because there's all these cells. Like this is my cell here. All these cells go down. You can't see anybody either. So you're.
Is there anybody in there with you, or are you by yourself?
I'm by myself.
Okay.
They send a mental health worker around periodically to check on everybody. But a mental health professional, he's talking to you outside of your cell. Mm-hmm. So there's no confidentiality. Everybody can hear anything. Right. They do send books around, and I'm reading it, but after like 3-4 days, the books are read already. It's another week to go. You tried sleeping some of the time away, but then you kind of get slept out. You can't sleep anymore. So then you have another like 2, maybe 3 days left. So that was very difficult. You're not allowed to go to the commissary and purchase food items. You can't eat anything that's there, that items you've purchased. You're just dependent upon the food from the state. So the correction officers are the ones who are coming around and putting the food on your tray. And so if there were a couple of times where I was asleep and I got up while they were feeding the prisoner on the cell next to me. They had just passed by my cell. And and they didn't wake me up or anything. They refused to give me anything to eat. They told me to be awake next time.
Wow.
Yeah, so there was that part of it. Anytime you go anywhere in the SHU, you have to first they handcuff you first. And I remember when they would bring me to recreation with the handcuffs on. They bring me outside, and you can't see the night, and you're just there by yourself with like a pull-up bar in it. And I really disliked being in handcuffs a lot.
A pull-up bar?
Yeah.
Were you working out?
Well, it was I did work out some, but there was just a pull-up bar in the area. But I'm just trying to say that it wasn't really anything to do. I'm saying.
I know what you're saying.
So in time, I just decided, when they would ask me, "You going to recreation?" I would just say no, because it wasn't worth the aggravation. The recreation they were going to give me was not worth the aggravation of being put in the handcuffs, is what I'm getting at. So, and so within a short amount of time, I just started refusing to go to recreation. They say, "Are you going to recreation?" And I would say no.
How much time did you spend in the SHU altogether?
Altogether, 28 days.
28 days. Jesus. So at what point did you start to see a light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah.
Like, was there, I know you talked about the Innocence Project, and
Yes.
they wouldn't work with you in the beginning?
Yes, they wouldn't work with me at the beginning. So they're an organization in Manhattan that works to free wrongfully convicted prisoners across the country in cases where DNA testing can show innocence and in which no prior testing had been conducted. So the problem is that in my case, the DNA already had been, the testing had been done. So their model would be, they take cases, do the testing, and then present the evidence into court, introduced as newly discovered evidence.
Right.
That was not an option for me because the jury already knew that. So that wouldn't have been anything new. So they would not work with me. They took about a year to decide that. They had never before saw a case where the DNA excluded somebody, and yet there was a conviction. So my appeals are all over after about 11 years. We're in 2001 now. And the only way back into your court once your appeals are over, when your appeals are over, they don't give you an attorney any longer either. So the only way back into court at that point is if you can find, there's either a change in law or if you can find some previously unknown evidence of innocence. So I didn't have any money to hire an investigator or an attorney. So hence the need to embark on this letter writing campaign. So I wrote letters for 4 years looking for help, rarely getting any answers other than the occasional no. Eventually, one of the letters that I wrote to a woman who had wrote her memoirs from when she was a prison warden, Tekla Miller, she wrote a book called The Warden Wore Pink. And that was one book. So at the end, I was not, I wrote everyone I could think of. At one point, I was just going to the general library to look for ideas on who to write the next letter for. And there was a book called Chicken Soup for the Prisoner's Soul, which I saw had contact info in the back of the book for like half the author. So hence I borrowed it. And one of it had chapters of many different books, including Warden Wore Pink. So I wrote her in care of the publishing company. Somebody from the publishing company sent the letter instead to Claudia Whitman, who's an investigator, and she wrote me right away. And she was convinced of my innocence based on the DNA. So we brainstormed together. She tried to get people to take my case, and one of her ideas was the winning one. She said, "Why don't you write the Innocence Project again?" And I wouldn't have thought to write them because I got that response from them before. But she said, "Look, DNA texting has evolutionized. They have the DNA database now, so the prior denial is irrelevant. So just write them again." So I wouldn't have thought to write them again, but it was kind of out of ideas, so I wrote them. And she also lobbied them from outside the organization. She got other people other respected legal professionals also to write them letters. And then I got lucky that one of the intake workers, Maggie Taylor, who's not an attorney, when the Innocence Project declined to take my case again, she represented it 2 more times.
Wow.
The third time is what she pushed it across. She suggested that, they use the DNA data bank, which was an idea I gave her. So once they agreed to take my case, that's when I started getting some light across the tunnel. My darkest time was after I got turned down for parole, because remember, I lost all the appeals. I wrote letters for 4 years. I didn't get any responses, and I went to the parole board, and then I got turned down. So that extra year was the darkest time period. I would say the first 6 months of that. Then when I was in communication with the Innocence Project, when they finally agreed to take the case, that's when I started having some hope.
So what changed once they finally agreed to take the case? And you mentioned the whole DNA
data bank had been created. That's what changed. So now there was something they could do with the DNA to constitute something new.
And so the man who actually committed this crime, who had raped and murdered that girl,
yes,
had he been arrested at this point, or was he still free?
He had been arrested. So Stephen Cunningham was killed a second victim 3.5 years later after killing Angel Correa, the victim in my case. So he had strangled to death his girlfriend's sister. So at that time VCRs were still kind of like expensive, and he was trying to steal her VCR. She walked in on him, and she would not agree to let him take the VCR to sell it to buy money for drugs, and so he strangled her, and so he was in prison for doing that. So for about there was a time period of about 12 and a half years where we were both in the prison system at the same time. Never in the same prison, but in the overall prison system.
Do you think that when during your whole trial process he was aware of it?
Yeah, I really do, because it was, it was every time I went to court, it was a major media moment.
Really?
It was, and virtually all the articles were written from a guilt presumptive oriented perspective. People were talking about. In fact, I knew I've met, since I've been out, I've met somebody that used to get high with him.
No way.
Yeah, and they said that sometimes that they talked about the murder and the trial and the case. So I knew that he knew about it, even though he says he didn't.
Is he still alive?
He is. He is still alive.
Have you ever talked to him?
I have not. I have not talked to him.
Why would you want to? I mean, I can't even imagine.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, the closest I came was I was a few feet away from him during the deposition in the lawsuit. But I want to go back to DNA, and I'll come back to him in a minute.
Sorry, we got off track.
Okay, sure. So they took the crime scene DNA evidence. I have the Innocence Project representing me. So that was the first thing. The second thing, that Janine Pirro had left off, who had blocked all the testing. She left office, and her successor was willing to let me get the testing. So that was the second key. The third thing is we got lucky that his DNA was in the data bank. So they took the DNA, put it in the DNA data bank, and it matched him, because his DNA was there because he killed the second victim. And confronted with that, he admitted he was the person who committed the crime. So on September 22nd, 2006, the conviction was overturned, and I was released. I went back to court November 2nd, 2006, at which point all the charges were dismissed against me on actual innocence grounds, and Stephen Cunningham was subsequently arrested and convicted of the crime.
Wasn't he already in prison, though?
He was already in prison,
Okay.
but they still charged him with the murder that he had did
So he
before.
went back to court?
Yeah, he went back to court. Yeah, he was still in prison, but he went back to court. Yes, wow. And he was sentenced to an additional 20 years.
What was that like for you when you first when they found the DNA and it matched him, and you started going, okay, this is going to be a process of being released back into the free world?
Sure. So I found out that I was going home the day before I went home. So So my attorney came to see me. So they opened my cell. I'll take a second or two, because again, this is a longer podcast. So general rule of thumb: if the guards open your cell, you're supposed to go down and see why they opened your cell, see what's going on, right? So they open my cell, and I stick my head out and look down there, and the guard just yells, "Visit!" And I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense. Who else come to see me? So I went down there and had him double check and call the visiting room, confirm, yeah, I have a visit. So then I run back to my cell and get a shirt. I had like a routine. Most prisoners do. We have like a visit shirt, like a shirt we keep really nice just for that, because that's the closest we're going to come to making a public appearance of any kind.
Yeah, got to make a good impression.
Right, exactly. So I'm hurrying up. The visiting room is quite a distance from my cell, because I don't want to get caught in the count. If I don't get into the visiting room by like 5 to 11, I'm going to be stuck. They're going to do the count, and I'm not going to be able to get in the visiting room for another 2 hours. So I'm hurrying up. So as I'm hurrying up, I'm buttoning my shirt and I'm thinking to myself, well, who the hell came to see me? So when I get in there, there's this woman, and she's waving to me like this, and I don't recognize her. But I wave back, and I think, well, maybe she's mistaking me for somebody else, or maybe she knows me from the visiting room, like in Elmira. So I asked the guard, who came to see me? And the guard looks at me like I'm nuts, and and she says that person, and she said, well, don't you know who came to see you? And I lied to her and just said, well, yeah, of course, sure I know. I didn't want her to cancel the visit, Mm-hmm. So I walked over to this woman, and she says to me, she identifies herself as Nina Morrison, who's my attorney at the Innocence Project, and she says, the items have been tested, And so, like, my antennas are already up for anything out of the ordinary because I've already had experiences with out of the ordinary and it with disastrous results. Like when the wrong information was given to my attorney and everything. You remember the technicality we
Yeah.
covered. So I'm on the lookout for anything amiss is what I'm getting at. And when she said the items were tested, that was something that kind of set off those alarms. And I said to her, what do you mean the items have been tested? They're not supposed to have been tested for another month. And she said, well, the district attorney pulled some strings and got the lab to expedite the testing a little bit faster. And, the results match the actual perpetrator. You're going home tomorrow.